Hey everyone, welcome to the Wilderness Reboot podcast. I'm Mark Adamski. Again, Wilderness Reboot is a transitional support community for wilderness alumni students, and we just love what wilderness is all about. And so that is why we have an amazing guest today. We're so excited to introduce Mr. Jeff Holloway. How's it going, Jeff?
Doing well. Good morning, Mark.
All right, so we want to hear your story. Our listeners at home, families, other colleagues, and professionals. We want to learn about First Light, how it got started, how you got into this field, and just the evolution of the program. And so, without further ado, just go ahead and tell us your story, Jeff.
All right. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while, so it could be a long story. But, I got into this field to work with kids. Back in 1990, I started my first gig as an overnight staff in a residential program. Still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I knew I wanted to be with kids, and I absolutely loved it. And completely switched my major from pre-vet medicine to social work.
Okay.
And just kind of advanced through there. Have worked residential, I've worked therapeutic boarding, obviously I've worked wilderness, and finished up my BSW at the University of South Dakota and my MSW at the University of Iowa. And that's about 2002 was when I found wilderness and started working at a therapeutic boarding school that also had a wilderness program. So it's been a great journey seeing the development, especially over the last 20 years.
Wow, awesome. And so, how did you come, I guess, from those locations, then land on the map in Georgia?
Sure. Well, I was finishing up my MSW, and I just wanted to see what was out there. And so, my oldest daughter was 1 year away from starting school. So I wanted to be somewhere to give my family stability because I didn't want to pick up and move once I started my new MSW career. And, I found some wilderness posts and I didn't know what that was and thought, well, that sounds pretty cool. And so just looking around, I saw Georgia, and I always loved the Southeast and Appalachia, and had the chance to move down here to a program that had both wilderness and therapeutic boarding, and picked up and moved my family down to Dahlonega, Georgia,
Right
and
on.
haven't looked back since.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. I can't wait to come down there and see a little bit more of that part of the world. Tell us a little bit about the outdoors down in Georgia. What can folks expect to see or maybe do at First Light?
Sure. So one, our field of operations in the Chattahoochee National Forest. And so it is absolutely gorgeous down here. I love the Southeast. The leaves are just starting to turn. I was took a motorcycle ride up to Asheville yesterday, and just starting to see some of the colors turning in the northern sections. But this is just beautiful area. Having the kids to be able to be out in such a beautiful environment that keeps the tree cover, keeps the diversity that you see here from the creeks to the mountains to the flat area. And so coming down here, this is where my heart is. We just found this to be a great place for healing for the soul.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's going to lead us to some next questions I have. And for folks to kind of get a big picture of what's a little bit more unique about First Light and how you kind of incorporate venture programming. I know we spoke earlier and how you mentioned the word that whereas we bring the adventure to, our students rather than the opposite. Could you kind of just, give folks who are listening just a big overview of some of the students you serve, the ages, and kind of the stuff they're dealing with?
Sure, sure. So we are licensed by the state of Georgia, and so that's something we're both licensed by the state of Georgia, accredited by the Joint Commission, and also accredited by Cognee as a school. So trying to make sure that there's standards out there that we're meeting because that meets the needs of our families. So we are licensed from 10 to 18 years old. We're not taking 10 and 11-year-olds right now. That's on my wish list. We're actually developing our preteen program. But right now, we're just really focusing on that core adolescent group. Um, our specialty really is working with kids that have suffered from trauma and adoption. And when you look at trauma, I was just on the phone with the dad before you called in and explained to him that, people see trauma as that big event that happened in their life. We call that episodic trauma. and the near-death experience, the assault, the abuse cases that someone could say this is definitely an event that things started changing at. But we get a lot of students that come in here that have systemic trauma or developmental trauma, that long-term kind of low grade, that kid that's been bullied for the last 2 years that has just become more withdrawn,
Mm,
and people are seeing him as some behaviors that are acting out. But it's really because, if you're, for any of you Ericksonians out there, they're right where they should be. That whole identity versus role confusion. Where do I fit in this world? And especially during COVID, we're finding a lot of people that didn't find their groove. They didn't find their clan. And all of a sudden, these rites of passages, the connectivity isn't there. And so that's where we really specialize in with our attachment and trauma piece. Obviously, a large portion of our students are adopted. Uh, but for those that aren't, there's still a lot of attachment issues that go on when you have a lot of family dynamics that negatively impacted them.
wow. That's so awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I know you also have an incredible staff. I've met Jamila at a conference, and I'm sure you have a lot of other great staff. But that is so awesome to hear because the literature on, even addiction is looked at more through a trauma lens. And as we were talking earlier, before you would have to deal with the addiction, before you could do the mental health and the trauma. Now it's kind of more the opposite. And if you really kind of go backwards, everything can come back to developmentally our our guardians and caretakers, how we had safe attachment and how those things evolve. And so you're dealing with trauma and attachment. Now you're in the backcountry, and you were saying you're not so heavily focused on the adventure programming, and the way you implement the outdoor modality is perhaps a little different than some other programs, perhaps that could be more nomadic and more extended times in the backcountry. Could you maybe share a little bit about how your program's a little bit more unique?
Sure. So what we looked at is all the aspects that have made wilderness great over the years. There's a lot of forerunners for us, that developed wilderness over the years. And so we've tried to take the best pieces of that. My kids aren't going to hike 20 miles a day. That's just not our modality. That's right for some kids
Right.
in some environments. And for us, the kids are hiking and moving camp. All the same reasons that all the wilderness does that, right? The kids need to learn a regiment. They need to learn some resiliency and responsibility out there. But we're not going to do that 20-mile hike every day, because we'd rather spend that time doing the activities. My
Right.
kids are off doing climbing today. Most of my leadership team just left the building here about 10 minutes ago to go out and do climbing with the kids. Last week, I think they were out on the river kayaking. So it's using the wilderness pieces around them, but not saying we're going to hike today just because you have to do this because I want you tired and not acting out. That's the
Right.
wrong
Not
reasons.
punitive, not consequential, and kind of framing
Exactly.
that relationship a little bit differently. Sure.
And that works better with the students that way. When you're working with trauma and attachment, you got to develop that relationship. If they don't trust me to keep them safe, I'm never going to get them in the kayak if they don't think that I'm going to be able to protect them. If all I'm doing is taking trauma and attachment kids and operating a behavioral approach, there'll never be that connection, and they're never going to open up as much as they need to their therapist and to the field staff. I always want to give a shout out. The field staff of all wilderness programs do 90% of the work.
Yeah.
And it is those guys and gals living, a week at a time out in the field that makes such an impact on these kids. And by having the adventure such a strong component there, the staff are doing what they enjoy doing. And when a kid sees joy coming from a staff member, then that joy kind of, it becomes insidious, right? They
Sure.
all like going, hey, this is cool. We're all having fun together. And I guess you're not just this person in an authoritarian role over me out
Right.
there.
Top down, great culture, rubs off on the students. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I love, a lot of folks don't particularly love maybe this conversation, but I think it's a healthy conversation to have because a lot of participants, don't exactly have buy-in when they first enter programs, and
Mhm.
dealing with escalation and dealing with folks who don't um, have exactly that buy-in early on. You mentioned something about walking and not running and still supporting students through that difficult and challenging time of not feeling like they have buy-in. Could you maybe share a little bit what we were talking about earlier? I kind of love that, honestly.
Yeah. You know, It's being upfront with kids. You know, when most kids go to any type of treatment, they're not there because they walked into their parents and said, "Will you please send me
Sure.
to treatment today?" Right? We get that. It's we believe being a very trauma centered program, and not just trauma informed. Knowing about trauma doesn't get you very far. You got to be trauma responsive. You got to be trauma centered. We start that from the time the students walk in the front door. We know, especially if they came by transport, and there's some great transport companies out there that do a lot of trauma responsive work so that they're not being seen as, I hate the industry term of gooning. You know, I
Right.
challenge kids when they've been gooned, and we have a really strong conversation about, tell me what was gooning. And they finally realized, well, actually, they were pretty cool. You know, they got me breakfast, they talked with me,
Right.
they let me read my letters from my mom. And so we're trying to change that narrative
Sure.
with students out there, families. But it's that starting piece. And so that the story you and I were talking about is, you know, when a student says, well, what if I run? And, you know, I had an open conversation. Well, first of all, don't run, man. I said, if you're going to leave, just walk.
Right.
And that really throws them off of, you know, they're waiting for me to say, hey, I'm going to, you know, tie you up. I'm going to
Right.
restrain you. I'm going to do all
They're
these
trying to.
things. And I'm like, yeah, that's not what we're about here. I said, well, one, don't run because you could get hurt. I don't want you falling down, you know, into a creek. I don't want you tripping over a log. I said, if you're going to leave and you really can't process that with staff, then you know there's a path right there or there's a Forest Service road. Just walk down the road because the same thing's going to happen. We're going to keep following you to keep you safe. And eventually you're going to get to a point where I'll call the sheriff
Right.
and so that we can all make sure you're safe. And when all of a sudden I didn't get oppositional with them, I kind of talked with them about the
Sure.
process. And, you know, and then that now your parents will have to make a decision. And I don't want you to have to start over. I don't want the sheriff to get mad at you. Says, what can we do to make this work? Because the other option is if this isn't the right place, then maybe we do need to go to somewhere else that is more contained. And when you start putting the choices back onto the kids and they understand what this is, it's less likely that they're going to go. Because if one starts taking off, the staff are going to say, remember Jeff said don't
Right.
run? I had a student that just stopped and turned around and looked at the staff and like going, oh,
Right.
yeah. So, you know, sometimes they need that, you know, hour walk down the
Yeah.
pathway.
Lost some
And then what
steam.
do they do? My walkaways become
Right.
walkbacks.
The
And the staff
walkbacks.
just walk with them. And that's where it comes down to the training, right? Training with your field staff on not how to be reactive.
Right. Not getting the power
And so,
struggles, and so there it sounds like now you're creating autonomy, agency. You're putting it back on them. You're still showing compassion and supporting them. And how disarming, is that to say, hey, well, don't run, walk. We're here to still support you through these hiccups that are, that come with the territory. It comes with the process. You're going to have those bad days, and let's try to navigate that together in a relationship, trauma centered, patient centered, focused approach. I love that.
exactly.
Yeah. So also kind of with the relationship, as that's very important, kind of with your uh, type of student coming into your programs. Uh, uh, it sounds like from what you explained earlier that some of your therapists are actually with the field staff in the field for some of the adventure program. Is that correct as well?
Right. Because the adventure pieces that we do are great. They're exciting. The kids enjoy it. It breaks up the routine that they've been into. But the therapist then takes it to the next
Hmm.
level. So when you got two kids in a canoe and they both want to paddle on the right hand side, and you keep giving them some feedback about maybe they could do something differently there, but they refuse, right? That oppositional piece gets in. I only paddle on the right side. Well, but his partner only paddles on the right side. Then we get to spend the afternoon talking about metaphor. So how'd that work for you? We would kept going in circles. Yeah. Did anyone ever think about maybe compromising and paddling on the left so that you quit going in circles? And then a good therapist then brings it back to let's talk about that, how that worked at home. How did that work at
Right.
school? When did you quit? When did you refuse to quit doing the current thing that was keeping you going in circles and making no progress? And that's pulling that back in. A good therapist can really look at the metaphor that happens day by day in wilderness and then relate that back to how has this played out at home, and if you don't make some of those changes, you go back home and you and dad continue to paddle on the right hand
Sure.
side. Are you just back in circles again?
Right. Well, that's always been something that personally, myself and many others agree that is really a strong suit of wilderness. It's a great assessment tool, but also with a facilitator, a field staff, a therapist, breaking down those lessons in that relational context of that with the community and in their groups. Like you can really see some of those patterns come up from home and how to process that, deal with it on the day to day, and implement new strategies essentially. So when they get home, they're just more mindful to begin with, and now they have some more tools to try those relationships at home. So in your perspective, what do you think is so special about the communal aspect, or kind of the relationships forged in wilderness? It's a unique experience to have. Now they're with new people they've never met in the backcountry. Like,
Right. One, you have to open up, right? Because when you have a new group of people, and they are where they should be, they're wanting to connect with people their own age. And when, day one, I'm sitting on the stump saying I'm not going to do anything, but I have a student that's been there on day 60 to come over, I'm an adult. So if I tell him,
right,
hey, you're wasting your time, I'm an idiot, I'm an adult, I know nothing. But when a 16-year-old comes over and sits down to the new student and says, hey, man, I sat on that same stump 60
yeah,
days ago. Let me tell you where I'm at right now. Here's the things that I've accomplished. I'm already looking at next steps on, going home. And the longer you sit on that stump, the just the longer it adds to
right,
the end. And it just means a lot more coming from them. So that
right,
communal pace, but it's learning how to utilize positive peers. It's learning how to be vulnerable. It takes a while, but finally in a group, they're going to bring up that, okay, yeah, this was a tough place where I had an interaction with my dad and it still affects
mm,
me. And that's a lot of trust that you have to
right,
build. That's why trust in relationships is one of our core values, is not just trusting the staff, but I got to trust my peer that if I'm going to actually divulge something really painful to me, that the rest of my group isn't going to take that and, you know, be harmful to myself with
sure,
that. So that piece out there, that developing the relationships, the other piece, and again, I had this conversation with a dad that called me today, is they're learning actually how to use their therapist, right? By the therapist being out there and the staff being out there 24 hours with these kids, they're learning how to appropriately use their therapist instead of going for their 55-minute session, trying to waste as much time as
right.
possible because I'm only there because mom and dad made me
I
go,
love that.
right?
Hmm.
And if we can teach them how to use their advocate, tell your therapist, this is where my needs are. Because when they leave us and either go back home to a therapist or go on to another treatment program, we want to make sure that they know this is how I utilize my therapist to get my needs met, not just to check a box so mom and dad are happy that I went to a
Right,
session.
right,
So challenge them. You use us. Tell us what you
right.
need and how are you going to do this when you go to your
Right, and
next
often
step.
the argument or you hear from the students end is, well, I have to be here anyways. And it's, okay, well, what can we do for you now that you are here? How can we make this time, productive for you, and support your needs? And I really love that, because at the end of the day, if you're building that relationship, you're modeling what someone, can do, with holding boundaries, but being compassionate and kind of meeting your needs. And so I really love that approach. I think it's really awesome. And kind of going back to the communal component of not hearing it from authority figures or staff, but hearing it from their own peers within the group. I've seen in so many groups, being a field staff for so long, that 80-90% of the time coming from that 10-weeker, 12-weeker group member, it does so much more than coming from a field staff. And it's those bonds and
Exactly.
that vulnerability that makes it real. At the end of the day, that's real life, and really being vulnerable helps build that trust and that connection and build that bridge of empathy for one another. And those are it's tough stuff. Not only just being in the backcountry, which can be just a completely new environment for maybe students who are really cozy and comfortable playing video games, or whatever their lives look like, coming into the backcountry, um, dealing with things in the moment, focusing on their needs, on themselves, a little bit more mindfulness, Do they need, to clean themselves? If they're itching, what can they do right now? Okay, put on long sleeves because there's bugs. Okay, focus on the here and the now and be present. I think the outdoors can really bring that out. But also just those relationships for folks to really be vulnerable and connect, because yeah, it's not easy. And so I think that having that community and that relational component is really special, because it can look sometimes a dynamic from the students' end, like they're being sent there and it's punitive and they just have to put a backpack on and they have to go. And I think if done correctly, you implement that adventure programming properly, and it seems like you have a different clinical focus. It can do some real cool stuff. And so I guess wrapping up here, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what are some of the families or students doing after your program, or what do you see some of your alumni doing?
Sure. So you're probably seeing about 60% of our students going on to other treatment programs. And that's a place that I've been challenging wilderness as a profession over the years to get better at. And so when we have a student that's the consultant has said, we found a placement, here's where they're going, they're probably going to transition in 2 to 3 weeks. It's really important for us to make sure that we're transitioning the kids in a most thoughtful manner. We talk about transferable attachment. That's a huge part of
Oh,
our
cool.
programming. And so we want to make sure that if a student's leaving us and going to a treatment program, I've personally talked to the treatment program, said, send us your student handbook. What's the first things that this student's going to have to do when they step foot on your campus? Let's get on a Skype call, right? I can get to the top of a mountain out here and get cell service and get a Skype call with the new therapist and do an introduction. What's the first assignment they're going to work on? What is something that our therapist can start having the student do so they're already feeling that connection? Because remember, they're still probably not happy that their parents are sending them on to another
Mm,
program, but by that time they've come to terms with it. Let's really start that process. Let's let them. My therapist print off the website
wow.
pages so the
Oh, I
students
love
can read
that.
up on where is this going. And if we can get them doing that first assignment, we got a little bit better
Sure.
buy-in for when they get there. They have an understanding of, if it's a level-based system or whatever that might be, that they've already started that transition. So transferable attachment is just really important for us when they're leaving. If they're going back home, if that's the best case situation here, is making sure my therapists know that do the families have the therapist already set up? Do they have, is it an IOP? Is it a PHP? What are those supportive services that are going to make that uh, transfer back home be successful, which includes what has the family done? Kayla Davenport is our family therapist here that interacts with every family. And she's making sure, are you changing your systems, right? What were you doing before? Because your child has done some amazing work here. They've had to develop new coping skills, right? There's no digital here. So they didn't have the Xbox, they didn't have the TikTok, they didn't have the YouTube. They developed all these other coping skills. But if the family hasn't changed what they're going to do, eventually any teenager is going to revert back into the skills that were
Mm,
working for them before. They were negative, but they did work for them in avoiding life. So that's a huge piece of making sure the family's there. And Kayla will do some transitional coaching for usually about 6 sessions if the family wants that as they get set up with
nice.
their therapist. But that return home plan has to be in place. We have to make sure that when the child returns home, the first therapy session is already set up. The family that tells me, oh, we'll get that taken care of once they get home, say you're now 2 months behind because a lot of therapists are just on a wait list. So we want everything going home from their psychiatrist to their therapist. If it's an IOP, PHP, what
Right.
about school? What do we have set up there? So that transition has to be
Wow.
very
That's so cool to
thoughtful.
hear that. Yeah, your wellness program really helps with that transitional component and kind of that warm handoff to the next program if that family chooses to do that. And that was really great to hear. Jeff Holloway, Executive Director for First Light. We learned so much today. Anything else you want families to know about your program, or maybe ways they can get in contact with you?
It's firstlightwilderness.com. Learn all about us, what we do. we're the right program for a niche of kids. And I think what's really important, and I see that that's changed in our profession, that more and more wilderness and treatment programs are saying, here's what we do well at. We are good at the adolescents with, trauma, attachment, still depression, anxiety, all that's intermingled with there. But know what you do and do it really well. And if it's not in your wheelhouse, I just think as a profession, we've all gotten better saying, I'm not the best place for your child, and let me help you go to where it can. Let me refer you to a good educational consultant that can help you find the best place for what you're struggling with. But for us, it is that hands-on, it's that relationship piece that we love out here. Uh, as you know, as part of being part of Embark, the Goldens are our thing. So Rush and Springer are signed out in their groups, so we got the Golden K9s here,
Yeah.
and it's just amazing that if they don't want to talk to me, petting on
Yeah.
a dog for about a half hour to see how calming that can be, and all of a sudden they're a little bit more willing to
Yeah.
talk with me when Rush has been able to get you
Right.
calmed
Reminds
down a
them of
little bit.
home, makes them feel a little bit more kind of familiar. Yeah.
It's safe, right? A golden sitting in your lap
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
pretty
I would feel
safe.
safe. I love dogs. Well, Jeff Holloway, total pleasure, man. We're rooting for you. We're so excited. And if folks need to learn more, they can check out your website. And all the best, Jeff. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mark, for
You
having
as
me. Have a
well.
great day.